Well, things just seem to be going from bad to worse for my good old mate Malcolm Turnbull from Point Piper in Sydney. He's had a pretty forgettable fortnight, to say the least. One thing that comes to mind in particular is that shocking interview he did on Melbourne radio with Neil Mitchell. He made a fatal flaw of trying to make out he was one of the boys, and it's just not going to work for you, Mal. He was talking about footy, Australian rules football. He's a Sydney boy, and he probably doesn't have that much interest in rugby, let alone AFL. And that became glaringly obvious during this interview, where he's trying to make out he was a bit of a Sydney follower, and he was talking to Neil Mitchell. And then it happened that Neil Mitchell's side, which is Melbourne, and it's well known to anybody who listens to his program that he's a Melbourne supporter, were actually playing Sydney. And do you think Mel had a clue about that? No, he had not been briefed. He just stumbled his way through the interview. It was patently obvious he had absolutely no inside knowledge of that sport, and he should have just stayed away from it. But it's not the first time this has happened, and it has crossed party lines. Paul Keating is also notoriously guilty of doing exactly the same thing and claiming he was a Collingwood supporter. And we all know that Paul Keating, his love is not sport, it is it's antique clocks. He's not the sort of guy who wants to sit in the outer and never will. And the same applies for Malcolm Turnbull. So it was a real negative. Then on top of that, he kept pushing this line about how he uses the trams, and he got onto a tram for a photo op, and it backfired because none of the commuters even acknowledged him, apparently. He had absolutely zero charisma in the electorate, and it just helped reinforce that the man is a dud. From what I can gather, Steve Price and Andrew Bolt have actually now written off Malcolm Turnbull as well. And now they concede that the clock is ticking. And they outlined a number of issues that they thought were important to Australians he had been totally ignoring. And I'd have to agree with them. And the issues are very important. And the first one that comes to mind is energy prices. Malcolm Turnbull stubbornly pushes the line that it's wonderful that we've joined the signed on to the Paris Accord, reducing our CO2 output, which means we're hamstringing our own industry. You can actually tell that Malcolm Turnbull is really starting to feel the pressure now, because he came up with some strange statements early this week where he said he's going to be around basically forever. He's going nowhere. And then he sort of he put a caveat in saying, well, if I do have to leave Parliament, if I do lose the Prime Ministership, I'll just be off. I'll just get out of Parliament, which means there'll be a forced by-election, which means that the Liberals could lose their majority in the lower house. So some are taking that as a veiled threat. And considering his form with his chronic backstabbing and what have you, he's not much of a team player, and I wouldn't put it past him. But it was just extraordinary how he sort of overemphasised how he was going to be around for a long time, then basically contradicted himself. And, it's not a good look. And he's already got credibility problems, and this just isn't helping. He also, for some unknown reason, brought up the issue that he may be, that some people might think he's too old, which has never been mentioned by anybody in the media. So why bother doing that? He just really needs a decent media minder, because he's hopeless when it comes to projecting his image with the media. So he brought up an issue of age, which no one else has. Why would you do that? And the other thing he's just done in the last couple of days is when he was asked on his favourite network, which is the ABC, you won't be hearing Mel on 2GB in the near future, especially not on Alan Jones's show. They have not been particularly supportive of the Conservative side of the Liberal Party, and that's where a lot of that listenership is. are very much supporters of the Conservatives, and they feel totally alienated, and instead of actually embracing what would normally be a Liberal Party supporting station, the Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison now run to the ABC to get their media coverage, which is not going to do the Liberals any good whatsoever, because most of those listeners and viewers are going to be from the left wing anyway, and they're going to be rusted on. Not all of them, but a fair few. And if he really wants to win the votes, he needs to actually win Conservative votes. He's alienated. But they just seem to be doing everything they possibly can to actually alienate the Conservative rump. And it almost seems to me as if that's their plan. I'm wondering whether they want the Liberal Party to actually lose the election. I imagine there's quite a few MPs in the Liberal Party itself that's also starting to ask that same question. They're acting more like saboteurs than campaigners for their own cause. So it's a very strange situation.